Hi, LaMerle.
Hey, Shawn.
How you doing?
I'm all right. Yeah, I'm okay.
So today we're going to talk about trauma.
Today would be an interesting day to talk about it.
Absolutely. So why do you think it's important to understand trauma?
Not understanding it can derail you. I mean, you can get triggered, things can come up, and if you don't have a process for processing trauma, they can send you on a spiral out of control.
So you said today is an interesting day to talk about trauma. Did something happen today?
Yeah, today I woke up, I had a visit from my parole officer this morning, and it just brought up a lot of different feelings of being vulnerable, of being fearful, being reminded that I'm still in custody, although it's the lowest level of custody, I am still in custody. And so it was triggering, it was traumatic. It brought back, even though it wasn't consciously at the forefront, it brought back the fact that I am a convicted felon, that I committed a crime, that I paid over 2 decades of my life in actual prison for that crime, and despite the fact that I'm physically free on some levels, I'm still incarcerated.
Thank you for sharing that. So I know you know more about trauma than most people and understand how trauma from your childhood can be triggered later in life. So I wonder if you'd feel comfortable talking just a little bit about sort of trauma from when you were a child up until now, and how the trauma from early in your childhood then gets triggered later in your life as an adult.
As a child, I was physically abused, verbally abused, mentally abused, sexually abused, and what happens as a result, you begin to create these different masks, and you have the coping skills, coping mechanisms. They're not healthy, but you have to get through it. And for mine, it was, we talk about the fight, flight, or response. And growing up in the areas that I grew up in, it was fight. And so you get triggered and you fight, right? You engage in violent activities and things like that. You become desensitized to violence and trauma and abuse because you've been subjected to it. So in going to prison, serving a life sentence, obviously you have to address some of those core issues. You have to explain it to the board, but that doesn't make it go away. You learn how to deal with it in that confined setting. So you master it, like you master whatever your coping mechanisms is in a prison type setting. Well, getting out of prison, you're going to be re-triggered because you're not in that confined setting. You're out here in society, and things are going to come up. And although you have different tools that you equip yourself with to deal with prison and get out of prison, those things are going to come up again. And so we talked before about having some form of coping skills and different things like that. And for me, just realizing that, it's like being an addict of a specific drug or something. You're always going to be an addict of having experienced those traumas, and you have to be conscious of the fact that that stuff is there, and that if you're not in tune and have coping mechanisms out here that you've mastered out here, then you can fall prey to that.
So it sounds like you're saying that there's healthy coping strategies and unhealthy coping strategies. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what happens if you use unhealthy coping strategies?
Dead in jail, and or you just, even if it doesn't rise to the level of dead or in jail, there's a difference between living and existing. And living is just being healthy in spirit, whatever your thing is, happy. And existing is just being miserable, mad, angry, sad. You might not be reacting in a criminal way to that, but you're just, you can get out of prison and create another prison out here in your mind. I've told people before, I didn't get out of prison to be in prison, and having unhealthy coping skills is being physically free but yet mentally in prison.
So you talked about some of the traumatic things that happened when you were a child. Are there some traumatic things that happened when you were in prison?
just, there's having to engage in prison stuff. Without getting into specifics, but just, having to be consistently in fight or flight mode. When you walk in the yard, or, when energy changes. You've ever been in a riot or anything like that, when the energy, you can just feel it, right? And just the trauma of just coming in contact with either staff and our other inmates who are in a space that day, or that's just their space, and just that can be triggering for you. So yeah, there was trauma and triggering in prison.
So basically, the basic core of trauma is when you feel that your life is in jeopardy or you're unsafe. So it sounds like you're saying that many times while you're in prison, you felt unsafe or your life was in jeopardy.
Yeah, violated, scared, fear. Yeah, absolutely.
So your experience, go ahead.
It doesn't just have to be the core is feeling unsafe. The core is, fear, sadness, and all those different things. And, as a man, just as a human being, you don't want to feel those things. You want to be strong. You want to project strength in anything that seems to violate that. You want to defend against. You want to reclaim your space, right? And so if you don't have a process for processing that, and it's not necessarily that you actually have to reclaim it in actuality, but it's the mental thing. Like, if you've ever felt like you've been, for guys in prison, if you've ever felt like that you got violated or something, and then you go back to the cell and dorm or whatever, and you're processing that, and you feel as if you begin to feel like, well, I gotta go reclaim what I feel like I've lost, and that whole thing that can begin to play in your head.
So you talk about having some childhood experiences of trauma, some traumatic things in prison, and so with that much trauma, you're going to obviously be triggered in the community by things that might not technically be life-threatening, but still have that experience of them. Can you give a couple examples of where you've just been sort of going about your day-to-day life, walking down the street, and all of a sudden you had a very intense reaction to something that other people might not find traumatic?
You and I had talked prior and listing some things as far as like what, so I live in Oakland, and you can walk the lake, and, people running up behind you. People are jogging, that's what they do there. But if they come up too fast behind you, it can be triggering, because in a different setting, that's something different.
So you say it's something different. So what is that trigger when someone runs up behind you quickly?
Fear.
Fear? Fear of what?
Fear that it's going down, there's an assault, there's a riot, something is about to happen, right? So you go into protective mode, and it's like, what is this? And you can get nervous.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely get nervous. Hearing sirens, I was telling you before I was driving, and not breaking any laws, no laws at all, but a cop got behind me. I made a turn. The cop made a turn. I made another turn. The cop made a turn, right? And right now, today, we got a lot of stuff going on in the media as far as, black men getting pulled over, getting killed, and all this other stuff. But being on parole and just feeling vulnerable, like what if the cop thinks this or that and I get pulled over, or so all type of scenarios begin to play through your mind. It's like, well, maybe I should have walked, or, you get triggered, and I'm not doing anything wrong, but I'm still triggered and traumatized based on the fact that I'm in, a felon's skin, and it happens to be black.
So do you think there's ways that you can get help with that? Do you think there's coping strategies so you don't have to be so traumatized by someone running up on you while you're walking the lake?
Absolutely. Part of it is just sitting here talking about it, but then there's other coping skills, and there's all type of coping skills, and you gotta, just as one has to figure out the coping skills that works for them in an institutional setting, you're gonna have to come out here and experiment and figure out what it is that's gonna work for you out here. And it might not necessarily be the same. And you have to be open to that, because if you come out here with your mind made up like, oh, this coping mechanism is gonna work for me out here. Not necessarily so.
Okay, thank you, LaMerle. That'll be the end of this episode.
Don't worry, I'm sure there's more to come.
Yes, next episode is going to be the brain and the body and how it deals with trauma.
Okay.